and welcome to Learning Kitchen Live. We're broadcasting live from the Community Servings Learning Kitchen, and this is episode 9 of our Learning Kitchen Live series. So today I'm going to be talking about a slightly you need to buy organic produce, and then along with that I'm going to be making this really lovely summer salad using some melon and cucumber and things that are just abundant right now, and it's going to have this lovely savory crunchy quinoa topping. So this could be something you serve at a luncheon or kind of as a side dish or as an appetizer for a full plated meal. So I think it's going to be really delicious and refreshing for a hot weather dish. But before I get started, I sort of want to just preface everything that I'm going to say by talking about the fact that the facts that I'm going to give today are not really intended to be sort of a fully comprehensive comparison of organic versus conventional produce. What I want to say is that my overall opinion is that the most important thing is that people eat fruits and vegetables. That's the most important thing that people should be doing for their health, and there really doesn't need to be a sort of a clash between organic versus conventional. There's a lot of people out on the internet who have really strong opinions about one or the other, and I'm not looking to sort of side or ask you to take a side on the matter. It's more, I'm just going to present you with some facts and do a little bit of myth busting and just sort of explain, what we really do know, and then leave it up to you to make your choice of whether or not you think organic produce is better for you and your family. So I'm gonna, kind of go through some little ideas and talk about what the facts are and what the myths are, and talk about what's the best way for you to make the decisions based on what we really do know. So I'm gonna get started with the crunchy granola topping for our salad, and then while that's cooking, I'm gonna get into some of the other things that I want to talk about today. So we are going to be making a savory quinoa granola. So this will be great on the salad, but it would also be great as a topping to a yogurt or anything else like hot cereal, things like that. So it's going to be a little bit of like a traditional granola, except we're going to use some interesting ingredients. But I am going to start with the most traditional ingredient. So I have a half a cup of rolled oats. So that's going to go into a bowl. And then I'm also going to add a half a cup of quinoa. So you can use the tricolor quinoa, the red quinoa. I'm just using the plain white quinoa. And so we're just going to add that in. And then we're going to add some seeds. So you can use pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds. I have some roasted, unsalted sunflower seeds here. So we're going to do a quarter cup of those. And you can use a nut too if you'd rather do that. So like some slivered almonds, anything that's going to give it some nice crunch and some healthy fats in there as well. And then we're going to add some sesame seeds as well. So those will give it a little bit more of like a savory flavor, and again, some healthy fats and a little bit of protein as well. So we're going to do 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds. And these are also roasted. Oops. Don't want to eat that little paper thing in there. All right, so those are our basic dry ingredients. Okay. So then we need to make the wet piece of the granola. So I'm just going to stir that up a little. And I've preheated my oven to 300 or 300 to 325, depending on if your oven runs more hot versus not. Okay, so to bind the granola and give it some flavor, we're going to use a couple of tablespoons of some olive oil. So I'm going to put that in a bowl. And then I'm also going to add 3 tablespoons of honey, just to give it a little sweetness. You really do need some form of like a sugar or liquid sugar. You could use honey, you could use maple syrup, but the granola won't really stick very well together if you don't use some sort of sweetener. But you could cut back if you are really trying to avoid sugar or this feels too sweet for you. And then we're going to add a third liquid, which is really going to bind it all together and make it nice and crispy, and it's the white of an egg. So I don't want the yolk, I just want the white. So this always happens to me when I need one versus the other. I always then have to make something using the other thing. So, you know, if you have egg yolks, you could make like a custard or something like that. Although I always end up running into the problem where then I have extra egg whites when I make custard. So it just keeps cycling back and forth. But you can also just throw it away. So I'm going to mix those together. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of seasoning as well. So we'll add some salt. So I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt. And then a pinch of cayenne. And if you don't like spice, you can totally leave this out. And then I'm just going to pour it over this and just get everything nice and wet. And you just want to stir it until everything looks really nice and coated. And you can see. And so what the egg white is doing in here is going to make it so that it really binds together like almost like one kind of bar, and then we'll break it up when it's all done. So what I'm going to do is I have a baking sheet that I've coated with nonstick spray, or you can also just use parchment paper, whatever you prefer. And I'm going to spread it onto the baking sheet, but I don't want to leave much space. I want to make it almost like I'm just making one big pancake like that. But you want it to be pretty thin. So just like, doesn't have to be any perfect shape. And if you get some holes in there, that's completely fine too. And so this should take about 20 to 25 minutes in a home oven. In our turbo ovens, it will probably be a bit quicker. So I'll probably check it in about 15 minutes. And just pat it down and keep it all together. And so we'll put that in the oven and let that roast off. While that is going, I am going to transition to making the salad and also talking about some of the things I wanted to talk about as far as organic produce. So one of the things that people sort of assume is that organic produce doesn't have any pesticides. And this really isn't true. What the rules are for organic farming is that you can't use any synthetic pesticides. So organic farmers do use pesticides, they're just all natural pesticides. And there are at least 20, if not more, like approved pesticides that are considered natural that the USDA will allow the organic farmers to use. The problem is that the government isn't really regulating the amount of pesticides that organic farmers can use. So the amount of pesticides that a traditional or conventional farm is allowed to use is pretty well regulated, but the amount of the natural pesticides, which are considered less harmful by most people, aren't really regulated. So especially in these really large factory farms that are organic, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not like a big factory farm. And so in those cases, they actually use a lot larger volume of pesticides on their produce. So when you're eating organic produce, it doesn't mean completely pesticide free necessarily. It just means that it wasn't using one of the synthetic pesticides. So while I'm talking about my next topic, I'm going to also go through some of the salad toppings. So for my salad dressing, I'm going to be using half of a chopped red onion and then some oil and vinegar and salt. So I'm going to get this going and I'll talk about the second myth. So the second myth that a lot of people assume is that organic produce is more nutritious, and that really isn't proven at all. So I think people sort of feel like there's a bit of a health halo over anything that says that organic, and sometimes you see organic things that really aren't nutritious at all, like organic gummy bears and things like that, and it just means that they were not made with any synthetic or non-organically grown ingredients. But a traditional apple, a conventional apple, and an organic apple, really there's no proven science that says that the organic apple or any other organic produce has more nutritional value. And when I say nutritional value, I mean more vitamins and minerals. And what really determines the nutritional value of fruits and vegetables is more, the quality of the soil and also how long it's been growing. So if you eat an apple that's grown traditionally, but it was picked right off a tree where you are, then it's probably going to have a lot more nutrition than if you eat an organic apple that had to come from really far away. So, rather than thinking about the nutritional value of organic produce, it's more thinking about the nutritional value of local produce. So, unfortunately, those of us who live in New England can't really eat local produce all the time. But, as much as possible, if you're looking to get the most nutrition from something, the less time it spends off the vine and in transit to you, the better off you are. Okay, so I've got my onion chopped up like that. And then to that, I'm going to add some champagne vinegar. So I have 2 teaspoons of champagne vinegar right here. And I'm just going to kind of let that sit for a little while, and I think I'm going to add the salt as well. And what that's doing is kind of taking the bite out of the onion. So, if you let it sit and it sort of leaches out, and it takes some of the sharpness out of the onion. So I'm going to add some of the salt as well. You need about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then we'll just let that mix up. And then to that, before I top the rest of my salad, I'm going to add the oil to complete the dressing. Okay. So for the base of the salad, it's super simple. We're just going to have a cucumber. The recipe calls for 2 cucumbers, but you can see I had quite the large one here. So hold on one sec. I'm just going to stop that beeping. Sorry about that, folks. Sometimes our equipment has a mind of its own here. So I'm going to peel the cucumber and chop it up. And so you would probably be using 2 unless you have a garden that's growing really big cucumbers. So we'll get that going. Ooh, my peeler isn't so great. So the third myth, or the third myth I really want to talk about is that organic farming is better for the environment. So I'm not saying that organic farming isn't better for the environment, because really on the whole, most, especially small organic farms, are really trying to use old-fashioned farming methods, and they tend to grow less like single crops, and it's better for the soil, or they grow multiple crops that kind of help each other in a symbiotic relationship, and that means that they have to use less pesticides. But the truth is that because there are so many pesticides that organic farms do use, that it's not necessarily always better for the environment just because it's organic. So my one example for that is that organic farmers use something called Bt toxin, and this is a natural pesticide that's not harmful to humans, and it helps keep away a lot of the little insects that get to their produce. And so it's completely fine for humans, and they use it pretty liberally on their crops to keep these little bugs away. But it's a little bit of a hypocrisy in some ways, because these same organic farmers are fully against using GMO products. So a GMO is a genetically modified organism, and that means that genes from something else were spliced into the seeds. But we actually have the ability to splice in that Bt toxin into the seeds themselves. So and organic farmers won't use that. So even though it's really doing the same thing and possibly means less spraying, and probably they can use a lot less of it, because it's considered a genetically modified organism, the organic farmers won't use it even though they're doing the exact same thing. So, this is a little bit of a controversial topic, and I certainly don't want to say that GMOs are all good, but I'm definitely not saying that GMOs are all bad. So I guess really sort of the point of what I'm trying to get at is that just because it's organic doesn't mean it's necessarily better for the environment, and just because it's grown traditionally doesn't mean it's necessarily bad for the environment, and that GMOs, get a really bad rap in terms of in the organic kind of blogosphere, And in a lot of ways, GMOs can actually really be beneficial, especially when we're talking about using them to prevent using too many pesticides. Okay, so I've got my cucumber, and you don't want to cut it up too small, just kind of into like bite-sized chunks like this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to spread it out on a platter. So we'll get cucumber going on a platter. And then we're going to combine it with some cantaloupe. So I have a cantaloupe that's already been cut up, because I don't think it's very enjoyable to watch someone cut too many things. So we're just going to this is about a whole cantaloupe, but I think it's going to be a little too much for this. Leave some aside and just mix them together like this. Okay. All right, so the fourth myth that I wanted to talk about is that it has to be all or nothing. So a lot of times people think, you either have to pick a camp, like organic or conventional, and the truth is that whatever gets you to eat the most fruits and vegetables in your regular diet and what works for you is best. So, if it feels better to buy organic when it's affordable, or, when they're on sale, whenever organic berries are on sale, I always pick those, just because it feels a little bit safer. But I certainly don't stick to that all the time. And like I said, buying local would be better than buying something that's coming from across the country whenever possible. But it really doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So you can decide, where it feels appropriate, or when it feels good or affordable. But certainly if it prevents you from eating fruits and vegetables because you are afraid of not eating organic, then that's really not effective. We know for sure that eating fruits and vegetables the benefits, the vitamins, the minerals, all the antioxidants that we get from fruits and vegetables far outweighs any possible detriment to our health that some of the pesticides could possibly provide to us. Okay, so this is sort of marinated for a little while. Ideally, we'd let it go a little bit longer, but in the interest of time, I'm going to do it now. So I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of some olive oil. And we'll just mix it up. And then what we're going to do is just spoon it over. So it's sort of a dressing and another topping to the salad. So look at that beautiful color. If you don't particularly like raw onions, you could probably hold back a little, or maybe use a shallot, which is a little bit milder. But also because the onions will sit in the dressing, it does take away some of the bite. Okay, so then before our granola is done, we're going to add one more topping to the salad. And I have here some cotija cheese, which is a Mexican cheese. It's sort of got a bite to it. It's salty. So whatever cheese you want to use, in the recipe that I'm going to post, it says to either use cotija cheese or something called ricotta salata, which is also like a sharp, dry cheese. You could also use feta cheese on this. It would be delicious. Or even just some Parmesan, some nice fresh grated Parmesan. Just anything that's sort of firmer and salty. I wouldn't want to use like a softer cheese, or a more aged cheese. So we only need about an ounce of that. And you can grate it on a grater, or you can just kind of take your knife and break it up into little pieces. Like this. So I'm just going to break it up and then run my knife through it a little so that I get it really evenly over the salad. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to address is something that people cite a lot as reasons for eating organic produce, and that is the Environmental Working Group's Dirty Dozen list. So every year the Environmental Working Group comes out with a list of the foods that they say have the most pesticide residue on them, and that's called the Dirty Dozen. And then they also come out with another list that's called the Clean 15, and those are the fruits and vegetables that they find have the least amount of pesticide residue on them. The problem is, well, there's a couple of problems, but primarily the problem is that they're really only testing for the absence or presence of the pesticide, but they're not really accounting for the amount of residue that would be considered toxic. In addition to that, the amount of residue that they're most likely finding on these produce pieces is like thousands or hundreds times less than what would be deemed toxic to humans. So even though they are finding this residue, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's toxic or that it's way more than one of the Clean 15s. It just means that the amount of pesticides is there. The other problem is that they kind of lump everything together. So usually strawberries kind of top the list, and I'm just going to check my granola while I'm talking. Usually strawberries top the list. Probably needs a minute. Oh, actually, yeah, we'll give it one more minute. Sorry about that. So strawberries tend to top the list every year of the most pesticides. The problem is that they are looking at all strawberries, but they're really just talking about the strawberries that maybe come from some big factory farms, and it's at a disadvantage to local growers who may actually not be using all those pesticides. So again, you know, it's more a case of where the food is coming from, how local it is, how far it has to travel, and how much they need to preserve it, as opposed to all strawberries having the same amount of pesticides on them. And so another issue is that a lot of times a conventional grower will use one pesticide but in a higher amount, whereas another farm might use multiple pesticides and kind of keep rotating it to avoid having to have like resistance to it. The problem is that when the environmental working group looks at this, they're just seeing the residue of maybe 6 or 7 different pesticides, and it looks worse than the single pesticide, and that's because it's picking up all the different ones that the farmer used. So I know that's sort of confusing, but basically it means if one farm sprays their strawberries with, you know, pesticide A on this week and pesticide B on the following week and a third pesticide, it's going to look like they're using way more pesticides than another farm that's only using a single pesticide, whereas we really are probably using either the same amount, or it's just not really an equal way of looking at it. And so residue data can really vary based on where it's grown. And then the last thing I want to say about that is just that, you know, the environmental working group is not like a scientifically supported organization. So they haven't been publishing these findings in a peer-reviewed journal. It hasn't been, you know, looked at it under like a scientific lens. So for what it's worth, you know, it may be worth looking at some of the produce that they do say is the Clean 15 versus the Dirty Dozen, but it's really not like an absolute proven scientific method for looking at how much pesticide residue is on all of our produce. So that's my sort of spiel on you know, whether or not it's worth looking at. And so we'll finish up our salad now. Alright, so we've got our granola. And you can see it's sort of baked into like one homogeneous thing. This down before I burn my hands. So if you're just joining us now, my name is Beth Kitzis, and I am a dietitian here at Community Servings, and we are making a cucumber and cantaloupe salad with a savory granola. So this does need to cool for a little bit. So while I'm letting it cool, do we have any questions that I can answer?
If you don't like quinoa, do you use a different grain?
Yes. So the question is, if you don't like quinoa, can you use a different grain? Absolutely. So you could leave that out completely and just do more oats. You could use another seed or nut to replace that. So I would say, replace the quinoa with oats or another type of grain, like millet would work, I think, really well in this too, which is a much less like pronounced flavor than the quinoa. And then also maybe replace it with some nuts or another seed too. So you could use pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, and I think almonds would work really well in that. Are there any other questions?
Would this salad keep overnight, or would it last a week, or is it kind of like a one-time?
I think the salad would actually last. I would just keep the granola off, but I think the melon and cucumber would last maybe like 2 days in the refrigerator. Even with the dressing on it, it would be okay. And just put your toppings on at the end or right before you serve it. All right, so I'm just breaking up this granola. So, ideally you would let this really cool completely before putting it on top, but television doesn't always allow us to do that. So I'm just chopping it up a little. All right, so that looks pretty good. And this will firm up more as it cools down. So you can see it's still a little like soft in the middle here, but it's gonna cool and it's gonna get a little crispier. All right, so I'm gonna take a spoon and sprinkle that over the top. So I hope I didn't alienate anyone today with some of my opinions. And certainly my goal is not to tell you not to buy organic or to demonize, the whole organic industry. I think the organic farms are great, and they're, certainly trying to make the world a better place. The real issue is, what's affordable for most people, what gets people to eat the most fruits and vegetables that work for them, and then also, what's the most sustainable. So an organic factory farm that isn't sustainable is not any better than a traditional farm if it's not helping the environment in the way that it is intended to. All right, so that's that. And then, this makes 8 servings, so definitely load up if you're having a party. And I hope you learned something great today, and feel free to drop questions into the Facebook link. I can answer those later for you. And thanks for joining us. Have a great day.